The courtyard of contradiction. The courtyard shimmered in the pale afternoon light, marble glowing like bone under the Roman sun. It was the kind of brilliance that hides rather than reveals, so bright that it made every shadow look honest by comparison. The air trembled with solemnity. Even the pigeons that usually fluttered over the colonnade seemed to pause, watching in mute curiosity. Choir bells murmured from the far towers of the Vatican, their tones soft and pious, yet the silence that followed felt heavier than any hymn. It was the silence of performance, the silence of men pretending that prayer could erase reputation. The Pope walked slowly, his white robes whispering against the stone floor. His steps were deliberate, unhurried, almost reluctant. Behind him, the King and Queen moved like gilded shadows, figures rehearsed in composure, smiling through the strain of centuries. Cameras waited beyond the gates. The lenses were their new congregation, their modern altar. Every step was a performance, every breath a calculation. King Charles had come not to pray, but to polish. The journey was never about faith, it was about optics, the oldest sacrament of monarchy. The world had begun to whisper of disgrace, of a brother whose name had become a wound, and a son whose independence had fractured the illusion of divine family unity. Scandals dripped like candle wax over the crown, too thick to hide beneath ceremony. A house once cloaked in mystery now reeked of exposure. And so the king came to Rome, not for redemption, but for rehabilitation. This visit to the Vatican had been orchestrated like a cleansing ritual, a royal baptism of reputation. His advisors had timed every angle, the light falling through the archways, the sequence of camera shutters, the moment of kneeling beneath the Sistine dome. Within that sanctum of painted skies, under Michelangelo's defiant heavens, Charles had knelt beside the Pope, hands clasped in solemn mimicry. The world saw humility. What heaven saw was theatre. Humility cannot be staged. It cannot be rehearsed in front of press secretaries or tailored by publicists. It is not found in the press release of a palace. Humility must be born of truth. And truth was something the House of Windsor, or whatever name this weary dynasty bore, had long forgotten how to speak. The Pope's eyes did not betray judgment. They carried something heavier, weariness. He had seen kings before. He had seen the pattern repeated through centuries, men who confused crowns with conscience, who mistook pageantry for purpose. Monarchs came and went, kneeling before him in the hope that holiness might rub off like perfume. Some meant it, most did not. As he led them now into the open air, the old pontiff seemed to carry the weight of their contradictions in his silence. He had prayed beside them beneath the painted ceiling, but he had also felt the chill that lingers around those who love power more than penitence. He knew this performance would be splashed across front pages by morning, a headline gilded in reverence, a historic prayer of unity. But unity built upon deceit collapses under its own gold. Behind the polished smiles, rot lingered. It had the quiet persistence of damp beneath a palace wall, unseen yet ever expanding. The royal household, ancient and desperate, had traded reverence for relevance. They had become curators of an illusion, stewards of an empire that existed now only in ceremony. Every public act was a transaction, every handshake, a currency of survival. This meeting was meant to be a portrait of rebirth, a chance to present a king not as scandal-shadowed patriarch, but as shepherd of renewal. Yet it only deepened the contrast between faith and facade. For while the Pope prayed for mercy, the king prayed for image, and the two are not the same. When the Pope extended his hand, the king grasped it too eagerly, holding on as if the touch might absolve him. Cameras flashed like confession lights. The Queen's pearls glimmered like small moons at her throat, perfectly aligned, unbothered by conscience. Her smile was carved, precise, an artful echo of charm without warmth. The Pope blessed them both, but his voice was thin with fatigue. He spoke of service, of humility, of using power to protect rather than to possess. But the king's nod was mechanical, a gesture performed for posterity. His eyes were not fixed on the holy man before him, but on the horizon where the world's headlines waited to be written. They said later that the air in the courtyard was warm and fragrant, that the breeze carried the scent of Vatican roses. Yet for those who looked closer, the day carried another scent, the faint bitterness of smoke, the residue of moral fire long extinguished. Inside the apostolic palace, frescoes watched them go, prophets and saints frozen in pigment, their painted eyes filled with pity. They had witnessed centuries of repentance, both genuine and false. They knew what it meant when kings knelt not from guilt, but from calculation. The Queen smiled with trained softness, her hand looped through her husband's arm. The gesture was not affection, but choreography. In the distance, aides whispered logistics, journalists prepared their stories, and the machinery of modern monarchy creaked into motion once more. This, after all, was their craft: to turn decay into dignity, scandal into ceremony, sin into spectacle. The church offered incense, the crown offered illusion. Each had mastered the art of surviving scandal through ritual. The Pope, standing in the sunlight, seemed to shrink within his white robes. For a moment, his face carried the sadness of a shepherd watching a flock drift into darkness. He had hoped for sincerity, for even a flicker of humility. Instead, he saw a dynasty incapable of repentance, only obsessed with optics. And thus the farewell became symbolic, holiness walking one way, hypocrisy walking another. The marble echoed their departure, the king's footsteps heavy, the queen's lighter, but no less hollow. Behind them, the doors of the apostolic palace closed like the ceiling of a tomb. But even as the echo faded, so too did the illusion begin to fracture. For outside the gates, beyond the press pens and motorcades, Rome did not kneel. The crowd, curious but unconvinced, watched a monarchy try to launder its conscience beneath a Mediterranean sun. A woman in the throng murmured to her child, "They came to the Vatican, but did they come to God?" The question hung in the air like incense, unanswered, perhaps unanswerable. For what is faith without truth? What is atonement when it is televised? The king's entourage swept forward, his guards moving in crisp formation. Every lens captured his exit, each photograph a carefully curated relic of respectability. Yet no lens could hide the tremor in his jaw, the flicker of calculation in his eyes. His heart did not beat with penitence, it beat with public relations. To the world it would seem a triumph, a monarch received in grace, shaking hands with the vicar of Christ, standing side by side beneath sacred light. But those who knew history saw the repetition. Kings had always sought priests to legitimize their sins, to disguise dominion as duty. The church had long lent its altars to monarchs who mistook divine right for moral right. The Vatican bells began again, echoing across the marble square. To pilgrims, they were songs of salvation. To those leaving in the royal motorcade, they were little more than soundtracks for spectacle. In the car, the Queen adjusted her pearls and turned slightly toward her husband. "It went well," she said softly, as though commenting on a performance. He nodded, the faintest smile crossing his face. "Yes," he replied. "It looked right." Looked. The word betrayed everything. In that single syllable lived the whole truth of monarchy's decay, the preference for appearance over substance, for ceremony over conscience. The Pope remained on the steps long after the cars had gone, his staff beside him in uneasy quiet. He looked toward the horizon where the sun was beginning to soften, turning the marble gold. In his heart, he prayed, not for kings or crowns, but for clarity. For he knew that power, once detached from humility, becomes a parody of itself. Back in the apostolic palace, the frescoes glimmered faintly in the dimming light. The painted saints seemed almost alive, their faces heavy with ancient recognition. They had seen this before, emperors, dukes, and monarchs parading through these halls, cloaked in reverence but dripping in vanity. Repentance had become costume, faith had become currency. By nightfall, the images of the day flooded every screen and front page. Unity in faith, one headline declared. A new dawn of dignity, said another. Yet behind the crafted words, the public saw the hollowness. The king's face, pale, stretched, desperate, looked less like renewal and more like denial. The queen's smile was immaculate, but tired, like the porcelain glaze of something long cracked beneath the surface. For the world was no longer blind. The people who once bowed now scrolled, analysed, compared. They remembered the silences, the ones that protected power, the ones that buried truth, the ones that refused to acknowledge pain. They knew that the Church's blessing could not bleach away the monarchy's stains. The Pope's words during the private prayer began to leak through the diplomatic fog. He had spoken of service, humility, compassion for the vulnerable. He had said, "True royalty is measured not by birthright, but by burden." Those in the room said the king's smile had faltered for the first time, because service demands sacrifice, and sacrifice was something the palace had long outsourced. Thus the Vatican visit became what it was always destined to be, not redemption, but revelation. It revealed the monarchy's dependence on borrowed sanctity, its addiction to illusion, its terror of irrelevance. It revealed a dynasty more committed to image than to introspection, more skilled at performance than at penance. And so the marble courtyard, gleaming in the afternoon sun, became a mirror, not of holiness, but of hypocrisy. When the doors closed, when the chants of the choir faded into dusk, when even the cameras fell silent, only truth remained. And truth, unlike marble or monarchy, does not erode. It endures quietly, waiting for the moment when the facade finally cracks, and the world sees not a king in glory, but a man afraid of being forgotten.
Wow, wow, wow. Wow, that was a great submission. And to all our peculiar and amazing Sussex family, thank you all for working with us in this juncture, for supporting Ari and Megan. And do not forget to subscribe, like, and put a comment. Bye bye. See you in our next episode.